All right, man in the back says it's time to go. Let's go. Good afternoon, everyone. Excellent. My name is Jeff Rotberg. I'm with Tenable. I've been with Tenable for about 3 years. Cut my teeth working for a large ICS OEM in the security world. And today we're going to spend a little bit of time. We're going to have a little bit of fun. Some of it might be basics, but we're going to talk about essential steps, areas for an ICS security program. I might challenge a little bit of the status quo. We might have a little bit of fun and talk about some concepts that for some OT people I might get challenged. Let's do it, right? Raise your hand, let's talk about it. Yep, we got the guys up here who are going to challenge me, so let's jump into it. All right, so first thing we're going to do, right? Call to action. We're going to talk about backups, we're going to talk about visibility, we're going to talk about how to do this going forward. And we're going to talk about the CISO's role in these programs and how we here at Tenable, at least, are seeing this change and evolve over the past few years. So let's jump in. So first thing, do something. Just do something. Anything. We are still seeing organizations that are not taking the first steps, that are waiting, that have this IT-OT clash. And I hate to say that, right? We use that word over and over again. But take initiative. Do something within that organization. I don't need to review this slide. If you're at this conference, you understand this, right? So, yes, have a game plan as an organization. Have an incident response retainer. Do all of the right things because, I don't think any of us expect this trend to change, and I'm not here to lecture you on what has happened in the past. We're aware of that. I think from a Tenable perspective, though, right, most people know us as the Nessus company, right? I want to kind of give my perspective on, what we're seeing. I think this may be similar to some of your observations, but, even within OT, we're seeing ransomware, criminal ransomware, really be that entry point into these organizations, spreading laterally, ransom payments, and even, when these scenarios come up, these, ransom decryptors may not even, decrypt that material, right? May still be that double extortion, double ransom for these organizations where, you have to take care of those right steps. From an OT security perspective, right? We look at vulnerability management, which is what Tenable's known for. We look at the Gartner hype cycle. Let's see if I got a pointer here, right? So vulnerability management's over there. We know this. We've been doing this on the IT side for a long time. As we look at tooling and OT security, right, we're right here, right before this slope of enlightenment. We expect to see a lot of investment, a lot of value gained from these tools in OT. The time is now, and I think we're starting to see organizations from the InfoSec side, from the IT side, recognize and drive investment in this area. Okay, we also, right, being a little bit on the IT side, OT is a really good space for organizations to spend their money. IT is very, very heavily invested in organizations, right? They have mature organizations, mature initiatives, mature budgets. OT, right, that's kind of been, depending on the organization, variable level of investment, variable level of buy-in. And then from an operationalization perspective, if there are tools, if there are policies, how well are they leveraged across the organization? It depends, right? We're seeing that companies are starting to shift their spend more towards OT because they're seeing that help their security posture overall for the organization. Step 2, I could have guessed this one, right? Backup. Backup everything. And that doesn't mean just the controller code, right? We see customers struggle with this continuously, right? Understanding what is the bill of materials that makes up a workstation, what are patch levels, what are softwares, how does this all work? Are drawings included in that backup package? And exercise and test these backups, right? Because if you get hit, it gets pivoting. How are we going to make sure this disaster recovery plan works? And then we're going to talk about identification. We're going to get into this. But, inventorying and asset management of OT and monitoring the changes within that environment. That's where a lot of, we're seeing customers kind of tilt that attention back towards is those basics around asset inventory. So visibility, absolutely foundational, right? We cannot protect what we don't see. NIST-CSF, first requirement, identification of these assets. So from our perspective here at Tenable, and here's where I'm going to start challenging the status quo a little bit, right? 50% of assets in the OT environment, they're IT assets. Might not be owned by IT, right? Might not be running IT software and nannies and tools from a security stack requirement, but right, I've got managed switches, I've got firewalls, I've got Windows workstations, Windows servers. They are IT devices performing OT functions. And how are we managing these? When we look at those pure play OT assets, 30%, sometimes more of these are very dormant. How are we flushing out asset inventory of these devices to know what's on our environment, to know where the vulnerabilities are, and then doing that standard care and feeding, doing that hygiene work? How are we managing and addressing and tracking OT vulnerabilities within this environment? So, Purdue model, right? We're all fairly familiar with this, level 0 going up to enterprise. You know, I think as we've been talking the past 10 plus years around OT security, this has been our perceived demarcation of IT and OT. Agree, disagree? Agree, okay. So I'm gonna challenge the status quo, right? That's kind of what I'm here to do. I'm gonna say the reality from a what's deployed out there, it's really more this, right? Because I have IT assets. They might be running OT software, no doubt, right? They might not be managed. We don't want them managed sometimes by the IT organization. But the way that we're going to do care and feeding, the way that we're going to do our due diligence and vulnerability management and how we should treat these assets should look more like this. I'm not saying who's owning them, right? I'm being very specific here. But as we go to look at how we treat these environments, I think this is the message that we're trying to spread, and I think we're starting to see customers agree with that, right, from the life cycle of these assets, right? When I'm talking about, you know, HMIs, operator workstations, servers, switching infrastructure, firewalls, et cetera, they are really IT devices. They need to be managed by IT type of processes, okay? See a couple stairs here, a couple stairs. So in this environment, right, monitoring this, huge push years ago, right, passive safe, right? I'm gonna monitor this network, I'm gonna get a span port. You know, we're seeing a lot of challenges from a scale perspective of customers who are wanting to deploy monitoring solutions across their entire OT environment, relying on passive data to do discovery. And I'm using that generically, right? We'll talk about traditional OT devices. We'll talk about those IT-like assets deployed in an OT function. Regardless of what it is, those costs are quite expensive, especially in a brownfield environment. We're also starting to drive that narrative of, do passive. You should do passive. It's good, but be careful about where you place these things. Critical choke points, the right junctions, because leveraging an active approach to being able to flush out asset inventory and vulnerability information is really how you drive that balance of budget and success for that project, because we all want to drive full asset visibility, but being able to do that in a passive-only manner is extremely challenging for most organizations, okay? Now, do all of that and do it all of the time. Yes, really, okay? So how are we doing this, right? How are we seeing people be successful achieving this? So I have my IT, OT, Purdue model, whatever you want to call it here, with the operating system of those devices. I've kind of flipped it the other way around. But how are we achieving this hybrid discovery in these OT environments, right? So I'm going to use the nasty word, right? Scanning. Right? Everyone has heard the story about how they used one of my products the wrong way in OT, and punted a PLC from here to Timbuktu and took it off the network, and there's a bunch of really angry controls guys or maintenance guys because the IT guy came in and took down a process. I admit it happens, right? But we have to use these tools that are built for IT devices where they need to be used, right? We want to use those, going back to my slide of IT versus OT, when I have an IT-like asset in that environment, I really should be using an IT tool to be able to evaluate that, to get information, asset inventory, vulnerability status on that device, because that is what the tool is meant to do, okay? Then we layer in that active query, right? So not necessarily hybrid, right? Passive. Passive we'll talk about, but when I have those devices that are dormant on that network, those devices that are not communicating, I need to be able to go enumerate that asset without having to wait for 3 months for it to speak on the network, without having to ask an engineer to pull up a programming tool or a network tool and go browse a backplane. If I'm having to have an engineer go do that to drive success in asset inventory, in my opinion, that program is not extremely sustainable, right? Because I'm injecting other aspects into that process. So we want to be able to flush out all of that asset inventory by being able to talk to that device in a native language to build out that model, and then supplement that, right, with passive discovery, with the tools that we are used to, right? Understanding those protocols, breaking them apart, mapping those conversations. But as we look at and have conversations with modern organizations who are, frankly, struggling to deploy passive and passive-only tools to get the data they need to be successful, to go back to that first step of NIST CSF, right, as we look at identification, they're coming back and having conversations with us to say, we need to go fast, we need to have a very quick return on investment, quick time to value. How am I able to flush out asset inventory in a matter of hours versus something that could take me months and significant CapEx to upgrade my networks and my facility? We're starting to encourage this hybrid discovery approach for organizations. So we can have the right tools to address those assets in the way that they expect to be talked to get that information and have actionable data. Any questions? One back here. Ben, right? Yeah.
You can have a extreme network switch deployed by FlexPro that's actually running custom firmware and in a network that is not an IT network at all, or Siemens Scalens, or insert HMI here. So, even using native language and so on can be very, very difficult and something that has to be approached with caution. In the IT world and everywhere else, failing is an option. In most of the OT world, failing has significant financial and potentially safety impacts that cannot be just written off.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And it's valid, right? We're not saying this is an approach that someone's taking all of the time, right? You're not sitting out there just going all the way down the line, right, or down the process. But it is something, right, to be able to pull this data back, to be able to get a holistic asset inventory. You're going to have challenges, right? You're going to have bumps in the road. You have to do those and approach those at the right time. But in those, segmented areas, specific processes, it can become challenging to even get that data passively, right? So the ability to go in and reach and have a conversation, it helps us get there faster. It helps us meet the objective. Yep. Yep. So when we look at these, go ahead. Yeah, please.
So on that active querying, you're still depending upon network connectivity.
Yes.
So that's still the limitation. If you want to get those isolated systems, then you've still got to do the physical sensors. So do you have any idea what kind of percentages you're actually going to get out of those active queries versus the physical sensors? Because that's the problem with the passive.
Yeah, and that comes down to what the device is, right? Even if it has physical connectivity, it might be some sort of, I hate to call it a dumb device, but a device without a significant amount of logic, right? That, there's only certain things you can get out of it. There are approaches to, doing, I hate to call it a survey, right? But being able to grab that data and pull it back up, that involves the clipboard and the sneakers, right? But we find that this approach drives deeper, quicker visibility overall. But yeah, there's those isolated areas that you may need those sensors. And those sensors may do active query themselves too, right? But yeah, there's always that physical constraint to that environment for sure.
Well, you can also use documentation to help go through and verify things.
Mm-hmm.
Because it could be either diagrams that are done or actual documentation, data dump from your database that manages it, just to make sure you follow up and verify.
Yep, absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of folks, do integrations into systems that manage that, right? That's been a very common theme. As we look to coach organizations to go through this journey, it is that heavy lift of that active query to get that data back and establish that asset inventory, that vulnerability posture state, and then building on that success, layering it in when it's appropriate, where the technology is available, right? Especially across a fleet of assets in a brownfield, manufacturer or OT organization, leaning on that passive to get additional data and value for the organization, right? Traditional IDS and anomaly and event detection. But when we're working with these organizations, right, getting buy-in is the hardest part. We were just talking about that up front before, right? How do we get buy-in? We're talking again, right, security domain type stuff as we're talking about vulnerability management. How are we bridging that gap to our OT personas? How are we making sure that, the person who manages that system at the facility, for the organization is on board? It's bringing that type of solution and that technology that has an olive branch, right? That has a lot of outcomes and data that's interesting for them, that helps them do their job better. I don't think this is a new story for anyone in the room, but bringing all of these different ingestion mechanisms and understanding that overall, I'll call it attack surface, but that surface, that management for the OT environment for that persona is important to present that in a way that an OT persona or engineer gets value out of it. Right? So they are now learning things about their system. They're understanding what controls they can put in place without breaking connectivity or processes within their organization. And that's what's driven success for a lot of the organizations that we've worked with is, having IT or InfoSec manage that security posture of the tooling, but then in very careful and targeted areas, letting the OT teams and having the OT teams invest in the tooling, use it for processes that they're already taking advantage of, maybe other systems, integrating it so they can bring it in from a maintenance perspective, from a life cycle perspective. That's been a lot of where we're seeing organizations drive success out of this OT tooling. So all of this is worthless unless the CISO knows. I'm going to argue that, right? We are seeing a massive shift within at least the customers that we work with, that CISOs are now taking responsibility for OT security. A Gartner study, right? 82% of organizations are integrating OT into traditional SecOps. I think that number, to me, just based on what I see in the world, I think that's high. I think that's where we're going to go. But we're seeing those organizations start to drive because it is a business requirement. We're also seeing a lot of changes at the board of director level around security requirements, right? So similar to Sarbanes-Oxley, the SEC and some of their new documentation that's coming out, they're indicating that they're going to require a level of security competency at the board level, and we're going to see that drive deeper into the organization. It's been a very standard, I hate to call it fire drill, but very standard fire drill on the IT side. Something's in the news. Okay, are we exposed? Where are we exposed? What are we going to do? That has been a challenge for a lot of organizations on the OT side to answer those questions. We're seeing that start to change with a lot of the larger organizations and expect to see that continue. And then you have the insurance aspect of it, which is a whole nother probably 30-minute talk, but insurance companies are also looking to see if their insured parties are going through a certain level of care and due diligence to make sure that they're completing the right steps from a hygiene perspective around OT security. So, if you agree that the world looks like this, right? My one pitch. We talk from a Tenable side around using tooling vendors that are strong in both camps, right? Because we have IT assets in OT, and these are going to continue to expand as we look at digitization and other tooling being added there. So, thank you. Any questions?
In my experience, my customer pushed that OT line to the PLC, just to the PLC, because we have gateways that are essentially desktop PCs that are acting in an OT capacity. But then that gateway can be examined as a IT asset. But now, what we're seeing more and more every day, although the infrastructure is still existing, PLCs are still dumb in a sense that they're not like IT devices for one purpose. But they're getting smarter. So, what do you think about that line, given the movement of IT technology closer to the physical device?
It'd be hard to have to see it and understand it a little bit more. But I think as that IT technology goes closer to the edge, right? I think we're going to have to look at these things in a deeper way, right? As we look at the level of firmware, software that's built into these things, the origin, right, of that, and is it maintained? The level of inspection required to be successful at that level is going to increase the more that technology goes closer to the edge, right? I think that's my opinion, at least. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.